Hi there, my name is Gabriel and welcome to another EF Core 6 video. Before we continue on this EF Core journey and get into the nitty-gritty stuff around EF Core, I feel that there is some merit in spending a few minutes on AutoMapper. AutoMapper is a lightweight object-to-object mapping library, and even though it is not part of EF Core, nor does EF Core have any dependency on it, it does work very well with EF Core. And in this video, I want to elaborate on what I mean when I say that it works well with EF Core. That said, in this video, I do want to talk about what AutoMapper is, why you need it, and how to implement it. So as I mentioned already, AutoMapper is an object-to-object mapping library. If you don't know what object mapping is, it's basically the process of taking object state from one object and copying it and cloning it to the members of another object. But AutoMapper also does a lot more than just object mapping. It does object flattening, it does reverse object flattening, it does data transformations, and the list goes on. And I will show you all of those things in this video. Now, you might be thinking, well, object mapping is not a complex task, and you might even be thinking that you can easily code this logic into your application. And while you are correct to some degree, object mapping is a tedious and time-consuming process. So why go and code, or why go and reinvent the wheel if something already exists and that something already works very well? So in this video, um, I will kind of walk you through that entire process. But before we get into how to implement AutoMapper, let's have a look at the application that we've been building up until now. So this is our application called Student App, and it has a bit of architecture, a bit of layers. It has a core layer, which consists of our domain classes. So we have course, we have grade, we have student. If I click on it, you can see some of the members. Then we also have a data layer, which is basically our DB context and our DB sets. And then we also have the API, which is basically our front end for now, because it has Swagger already installed, and it's easy for us to test some of the logic that we are building. And then later on, we can build a front end, maybe use Angular and kind of display or expose the data in the front end. All right, so up until now, that was the layer of our application. But in the previous videos, we kind of directly exposed our domain classes to the front end. If I can say front end, I mean API, which is a bad practice. So what I've done is I've added another layer called the service layer. And the purpose of the service layer is to separate the domain logic, or the domain object, the DB sets, the data access, all of that, from the front end. And in the service layer, we have some DTOs, which is very similar to what we have, the domain classes that we have. However, the purpose of the DTOs will be to create an object-to-object mapping and then break the reference between the data access layer, or the dependencies in our domain model, and expose our data to our front end in a specific manner, the way that we want to do it. So we can do the object flattening, we can do the reverse object flattening. All of that should normally exist in the service layer. All right, so that is our project. This is what we have for now. And the only thing missing now is AutoMapper. So we need to go and add AutoMapper and then configure it, and then we can start using it. So let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to go to the blog post of this video, and the blog post there will be a link below this video. And if you scroll down, you'll have a button that you can click on to get the code for this video, so that you can step through the process. And then also what I've done is I've made some notes here just to kind of give you some view of what I've changed in the previous code base in preparation for this video. Okay. All right, and then basically if you have all your code and set up and running inside Visual Studio, you can come to step 2, and step 2 is where we want to install AutoMapper into our application. So there are two ways you can do it. You can either install the core package, which is this one over here, or you can install the package that is dependency aware, that supports dependency injection. And it will be this one over here. And this is the one that we will use for this video demo as well. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go to the package manager console and choose the service layer, and then install our AutoMapper package. All right, so now AutoMapper is installed. If I go to my dependencies, I will be able to see my package. And if I scroll down, I will see also the core package already installed, because there's a dependency on the core package. All right, so that's step number 2. The next step is we want to add the configuration bit to our application as well. Now, the configuration bit is basically a file that we'll need to add. And this file, or this class, will inherit from the AutoMapper profile. So your AutoMapper profile is basically your configuration profile. And you need to create an instance of that profile whenever you want to do the object mapping. So we'll get to that, but for now we need to set up the configuration file. And what you can do is you can scroll down and you can copy this file name. So this file name is, I mean, whatever you want to call it, but we're calling it the mapping configuration for now. And the place where I'm going to put it is inside my service project. And what I'll do is I'm going to create a new folder called infrastructure. And in there, I'm going to create another folder called mapper. Now you don't need to do this, but I like to kind of modularize certain bits of things in my applications, and I'm just going to follow my usual approach. So for now, I have this mapper folder, and in there, I'm going to add a new class. And of course, this will be the mapping configuration class. So I'm just going to paste that name there. Then I'm just going to go back to the blog post here, and I'm just going to copy all of this here and then replace my existing class name. And then what I need to do is I need to resolve the errors in this class. And basically all that is needed is to bring in those missing imports or namespace imports. So for now, I'm just going to import the AutoMapper namespace. And then I'm also going to import my core.domains namespace and also my DTO namespace. And the way I'm doing this is I'm pressing on the control plus the dot button, and then it pops up this menu. And then in this menu, I can just choose the option that I wanted to execute. And basically, what we need to do right now is we need to execute the first option, which is importing those namespaces. So I'm just going to press enter, and there we go. So now we have our class, a mapping configuration class set up. It inherits from the profile class, and that's about it. But before we move away from this view, let me just quickly explain what we have here. So we are using the create map method to set up our mapping that we want to do between our different classes or different objects. So we want to be able to do object mapping from our grade class or object, which will be at runtime, to our DTO grade object. And then we use the .for member to specify for which end member we want to do this mapping for, and specify, okay, well, in this case, it must map from the source, which is the ID. So we have the ID mapping and we have the name mapping. If I go to any one of these classes, you will see that that's basically all we have in this table. In this particular class, we have the ID and the name. Now, if I want to ignore a specific member, so if I say, well, I don't want to map with, I don't want to map my IDs. I don't want to expose my IDs to the to my front end. I can, for instance, go and say, object dot ignore, and this will basically tell AutoMapper not to map my IDs. Now, if you look at the two different versions here, you'll see that when I get my data from my data access layer, I want to map it to my DTO. But then when I want to map my DTO back into my domain class, for instance, I maybe want to do an update or I want to do a create of a particular grade, then I don't specify my members. So I don't specify the different properties I want to map. And the reason why I don't do that is because AutoMapper has two kind of ways you can tell it how to map the data members of different objects. So behind the scenes, AutoMapper has an ability to use naming conventions and data types, where it will look at, okay, what is the source, what is the destination, and if there is an equivalent data type, or sorry, an equivalent data member name, it will automatically try and map to that particular member. So if I didn't have these lines, it would have been fine. AutoMapper would have worked, but I could also explicitly tell AutoMapper how I want it to map. Now, when you do object flattening, you pretty much going to follow this approach here. And if you do reverse object flattening, you can do that. You will follow this approach as well. But if you're going to use AutoMapper just to break the reference between the domain class and your DTOs, then you can go and follow this approach over here. But I like to always explicitly tell AutoMapper what it should do. So for this demo purpose, I didn't explicitly specify all of these mappings, but in my production applications, I would do that. The other thing I would do here is that if there is a relationship between one of my domain objects or domain classes with other domain classes, and we haven't touched relationships yet, so that's why I haven't included it here. But what I will do is I will break that relationship by using AutoMapper. By using this method here, this ignore method, because if I don't specify the ignore method, AutoMapper is going to try and do the object-to-object mapping on the relationships as well, and that can potentially create problems. So I like to be more in control of my relationships, how they get mapped, and for that purpose, I use the ignore method to break that or to instruct AutoMapper not to create that particular mapping. All right, so that is okay. So before we go further, I just want to quickly undo this. Oops. There we go. All right, so the next step is to set up AutoMapper for dependency injection. And in order to do that, we need to specify our configuration file. And then we need to create an instance of our profile of that configuration file, and then add that into our IOC container. All right, so what you can do is you can scroll down and you can copy this code over here and go back to our student app, scroll down to our extensions folder here, add to the service extensions, and then right above the existing code, we can go and add our missing bits. We can just bring in the namespaces. So that's our AutoMapper mapper configuration class, bring in the namespace. And then we also need to bring in the namespace for our own configuration file, which we, in this case, named it the same. And then the rest should all be fine. So now we go and so now we have our mapping config object. Then we create an instance of our configuration, and then we add our configuration instance into our IOC container. All right, and that's it. So I'm going to save that. All right, so we are ready to start using AutoMapper. So what you can do is you can scroll down, and you will notice there are two approaches to invoking mapping with AutoMapper. There is the map method, which is the one I prefer. And then you also have the other option, which is the link support, which gives you access to the project to method. Now, of course, if you're going to use the link support option, then you need to install AutoMapper into your data layer. But my preference is that you use the map method. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to inject our mapper interface, which gives us access to our AutoMapper configuration. Once we have that injected into our service layer, then we can start doing our mapping. All right. So if you can scroll down, there will be some code. You can copy the interface code first. And before we overwrite the existing code in our iGrade service class or file, you will see that the return data here is domain classes, domain objects. Now, this is bad practice. We don't want to do. We don't want to expose our domain classes to our presentation layer. And in order to prevent that, we are going to return DTOs. So I'm just going to paste the code that I've copied earlier. And now we can see we are going to return our DTOs, right? And then I'm going to go back to the blog post, and I'm going to copy the other code which gives us some more changes. And these changes are basically going to be the implementation of our interface. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. Here we need to just bring in the namespaces. So I'm going to bring in the AutoMapper namespace. And then if I scroll down, there should be this one over here, the link support method, which we can also bring in. And that's fine. All right, so basically, if we look at the code, you'll see that here we want to get all the grades. And before we return the domain objects directly, now we're going to return only the DTOs. But you'll also see that we are able to, even though in our configuration for AutoMapper, we only specified the object mapping, implicitly, AutoMapper is able to our specific DTOs, but because there's a configuration for the concrete types, we can use generics inside our mapping as well. So this is really, really awesome. All right. And then if I scroll down, you will see here we have the link support method, which I've included here as just so that you are familiar with it. But once again, we probably won't use this. Well, I don't use this in production. All right, so I'm just going to save that. All right, so the next step is to refactor our controller or our presentation layer. And instead of returning domain classes or objects, we want to return DTOs now. So we're going to scroll down and we're going to come all the way down to our code. Okay. And I'm just going to copy it, all of it. And before I replace the existing code for my grade controller, I want to scroll down and you see here where we create a new grade. We basically specify here that we want to pass in a domain, well, a type of our domain class. And this is bad practice, of course. We don't want this. We want to replace that grade class with a DTO class. All right. And then, of course, when we call our service and we want to create a new grade, we have already changed that to only accept our DTOs. So we want to change that type here and pass the DTO instead of our domain class. So I'm just going to override this logic here. And bring in our namespace. Right, and there we go. So now we have removed our DTO, or we have removed our domain classes awareness or support from our controller, and we are leaving it in the service layer. So now I'm going to rebuild. Everything seems fine. There we go. So now if I run it, we can do some testing. Oh, before we test, there's one more thing I need to just do. I think we don't have our database set up yet. Yep, we don't have any databases. So we just need to quickly run migrations here and create our database. We want to change the default project to data. That's where our migrations are. And we are going to run here, update database. We're going to refresh our folder here. Okay, there we have our student DB, and we are all set up. So now I'm going to run the application, and I'm going to scroll down. I will get all grades, and there shouldn't be any, so it should be an empty array. There we go. Now I want to go and add a new grade, and I'll add grade 1. So I'm just gonna remove the ID there. And of course, what I could have done is I could have removed that ID out of my DTO, but because I didn't, it's still there. That's why it shows here, but I don't need it. So I'm just going to change this to grade 1. And I'll create another one for grade 2. There we go. And now if I get all my grades, it's going to return grade 1, grade 2. All right, and that is basically what I wanted to show you. So hopefully now you will have an idea of what AutoMapper is. Hopefully you will have an idea of why you should rather use it. And then, of course, you should have an idea of how to implement it now. If you have any questions regarding what you saw in this video, please feel free to leave your comments below this video, and I will get back to you. Thank you for watching, and I will chat to you in the next video.